Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Hello, can everyone hear me? Thank you all for coming. As a gentle reminder, please silence your cell phones. I am just a friend, and I'm here to introduce the introduction, which is going to be made by Kevin. And so Kevin Holden is a poet, translator, and an essayist. He is the author of 7 books and chapbooks of poetry, including Solar, which won the Fence Modern Poets Prize, Birch, which won a Sata Press Award, and Pink Noise, recently out from Night Books. He is taught at Bard, Brown, Iowa, and Harvard, and is currently a junior fellow at the Harvard Society of Fellows. So please make Kevin feel warmly.
Thank you. Thank you, Griffin. That infinite regress of introduction. Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm so happy to see you all. It is my great pleasure to introduce this reading tonight. Zoe is a very dear friend of mine. Annelyse is someone I've just begun to know, and both are poets I've deeply admired for quite some time. Their poetries, though very different, are remarkable in both depth and range, in their variations of form, fragment, voice, their explorations of reality. I'm going to start with the biographical and then attempt to discuss some of their work together. So, Annelyse Gelman's most recent book, Vexations, won the James Laughlin Award from the Academy of American Poets and was longlisted for the National Book Award in Poetry. She's also the founder of Midst, the author of the collection Everyone I Love is a Stranger to Someone, and the creator of an experimental pop EP and an artist book. Zoë Hitzig is the author of 2 books of poetry, Not Us Now, out this year, and winner of the Changes Prize, and of Mezzanine from Echo Press. She is a junior fellow at the Harvard Society of Fellows and currently serves as the poetry editor of The Drift. Okay, so to unpack a little, please forgive the obviousness of some of what I'm about to say, and also the technicality of other bits. I've been wondering lately about something we might think of as resistance in language. In essence, it seems to me that at this moment, complex poetic language is especially important and necessary. Language in prevailing and pervading cultural and political discourse seems to be losing its meaning, and we find ourselves living in an era frequently referred to as after truth. In the pursuit of truth, one might imagine that we might turn to some hypothetical, real, and rigorous journalism, or maybe to philosophy. This is perhaps fair. Perhaps counterintuitively, though, it might be that poetry is an excellent place to which to turn. Poetry's relation to truth is complex and has been discussed for a long time. Plato, Keats, Heidegger, etc. I won't go into all that. This is not a talk, or not meant to be a talk. Perhaps some poetry reports is in ways factual. However, I am most interested in poetry that does more than this, or at least does other things. Louis Zukofsky writes poetry, that is the phenomenon of poetry, what poetry is, as an integral with lower limit speech and upper limit music. That is the sum of all the infinitesimally changing values of vocalization, ascending up to where it becomes music at the upper limit. It seems to me that the distortions or deformations or reformations of clear semantic discursive language that poetry may do is where poetry is special. The notion here is that unmediated, smooth, commercial language is both reified and reifies, whereas work that estranges and reworks language unreifies. Lots of folks have expressed views like this: Brecht, Desserto, Nietzsche, Celan, Judith Butler, etc. One of the best articulators of many dimensions of this is Adorno. He writes, the artwork must absorb into its immanent nexus the discursive components in a movement that is contrary to the movement of the discursive. The language of advanced poetry achieves this. It is evident that artworks can heal the wounds that abstraction inflicts on them only through the heightening of abstraction, which impedes the contamination of the conceptual ferment by empirical reality. It cannot be purely intuitive. It must also be thought. Art itself thinks. I got thinking about this most recently in part because of the title, process, and structure of Annelyse's Vexations. The book is named after a mysterious work by Eric Satie. The piece's theme and its accompanying chords are written using enharmic notation, and as she notes in the books afterward, the manuscript bears the very Satie-like inscription in order to play the motif 840 times in succession. It would be advisable to prepare oneself beforehand and in the deepest silence by serious immobilities, end quote. So serious immobilities. Satie, it could be argued, was defying a music contemporary to his own, in which melody builds and builds and is used to rapture its audience into a kind of delightful hypnosis. And it is here that the resistance to which I referred comes into play. Basically, there's an argument for the value and necessity of difficult poetry. I don't like this word very much. My own work is often called difficult and challenging, and this vexes me. I believe that art generates its own internal logics and that the necessary process is only to accept those logics on their own terms and to be open to, in a sense, an alignment with them. In general, the description of a work as difficult is generated from a kind of category error in which some hypothetical reader grafts their readerly expectations from other flatter modalities of text onto aesthetic objects. On the other hand, we know what is meant when we say something is difficult, yeah? And it requires time, revisitation, attention, respect, effort of a sort. And crucially, it builds these capacities. Perhaps a better notion, in fact, than that a work is difficult is that it is resistant. Both Zoe's and Annelyse's work is. So now, more fully about Zoë and Annelyse. Full of intellectual and emotional insight, at once dialogical and warm, and engaged in rigorous, almost phenomenological investigation, their poems carefully and probingly open up lived experience, make it see itself, unfolding spaces between observer and object, tracing their disappearances, their loops in and out of presence, here, there. Zoe's work imagines and manifests alien-like consciousnesses, algorithms given voice, the articulation of mathematical ghosts. Annelyse's builds out a world at times heartbreaking of presence, grief, enlightenment, vexation. Both have lines that are impossible, ferocious, sweet. Both exist in kinds of post or pre-apocalyptic worlds. Words become crystalline, often heaping. Syntactic units can be beautifully long and winding, or abruptly short and minimal and broken. There are fantastic sounds and rhythms, gathering and loosening, shifting pace delicately, gaining inertia, densities that unfold across subtle lines and stanza breaks, buoying one up and letting one fall. The poems unfold in sharp scenes, never completely uncovered, but breathtakingly, movingly half revealed. Both poetries are suffused with a particular humanity, even when it is displaced into the wonderful mechanical architectures Zoë sometimes creates, or into the startling densities that can occupy Annelyse's work. The poems are amazing in their humanness, their honesty, their concern for an ethical relation to nature, to natural and urban worlds, to writing, to another. Quote, "It was difficult to speak honestly because it was difficult to think honestly," Annelyse writes. "Mine is a life dedicated to the calculation of loss. I know with certainty almost nothing, yet here I am executing legions of decisions each moment," Zoë writes in Bounded Regret Algorithm. The poem's unwinding makes possible a relation in which the reader, I think, starts to see thought, confusion, memory, etc., while simultaneously experiencing them herself. That is, and I imagine this must be true of all good poetry, thinking is not theatricalized, it is enacted. Minds are spread over spaces and vice versa as they move through watersheds, cracks between rocks and pavement, benzene, styrene, glinting off carbon and insect wings. They both have the courage to be simple and extremely complex, to embrace the personal and the impersonal in all the intricacy that they are. There is appealing through layers of dense moral constructions, panning for a kind of ore that is at the union of the cerebral and the emotional, demonstrating and exploring their essential and irreducible relation, sparking the electricity that happens in their joining. Their lines stretch and take us sometimes to the limits of containment, toward the abyss of being all things at once, as Holden wanted. This all things at once is similar to, but different from, I contain multitudes. It is, in a sense, you are uncontained. You are different things in different places, all squeezed into one impossible tectonic there. If anything is contained, it is everything, and hence nothing, which beyond the two is perhaps the only possibility for our current situation. The works oxidize and disintegrate, they questioning and making claims. There is a kind of scientific observation in these poems and a science to these poems. Their understandings undergo a sort of sedimentary and calcific morphosis worked over the course of long poems so that layers are stripped or reworked or filmed with chemicals or thin alloys. There is also a kind of mathematics of grit. There's a lot of ground, the implication both of a place where things can grow, but also where they die, the junkyard or plot of broken tools or older attachments. Last paragraph. The work of these poems feels deeply ethical, an ethical exigency of attention, care, complicity, response. And for all the loss, there is a propulsive forward being toward and in the world. We're so full of errors, but also luminous in our broken metals. The dense music of this writing is material and mental. It moves in emotion and moves in the grids and contours of non-emotion. Alienation and invention are fused in a lonely kind of reduction, ascesis and fullness at the same time, adding and subtracting, excess, holding, giving, and withholding. The outer world, the schist and rock, and the inner, the skeleton and joints. I read a line of Jean Genet's recently about that which no man could resist, no man could endure. And that is how I see these books, abstractly, longingly, soothingly, painfully, hopefully. Zoe?
Thank you, Kevin. That was amazing. It's really an honor to be here in this haunted and vaunted little space with so many people who I love and who were accompanying me on the journey that resulted in this incredibly bizarre book. So, and it's a real treat to read with Annelyse. You'll see her poems are just out of this world. I am going to read just a few poems from this book. And what I'll say in advance is that there are 3 sections of this book that I think of as 3 different futures that might be chronological futures, as in a near future, a medium-term future, and a long-term future. And they can also be sort of understood by the particular kind of voice that is speaking in each of those futures. The first section has a lot of algorithmic voices. The second section is incredibly weird, and I don't even know how to describe it. And then the third section, I like to think of as the section where the poet has left the chat, and a kind of disembodied voice floats over the earth and speaks. So I'll read some representatives from each section. And because Kevin quoted it, I will start with the first poem in the book, which is called Bounded Regret Algorithm. Mine is a life dedicated to the calculation of loss, I know with certainty almost nothing. Yet here I am, executing legions of decisions each minute. I aim to organize my ledgers like a skull, a place I imagine to be full of spreadsheets that seizure like cities, undefined functions that compile just fine. Explore, record, explore, record, explore, record. Eventually, I learn to limit the loss. I come to know where I should not go. The fire escape, zip codes with low property taxes, some drugs, some jobs. Then the threshold beyond which I'm just an airplane. Occasionally I fly new routes, but never load more than a few hundred passengers, nor advance into the sequence of sky that vibrates behind the sky I have seen. Never the pilot undressing in a suburb when the flight is over, pressing an unclosed hand to a cold bedroom window. Greedy algorithm. Is this or is this not what you tasked me with? To play our every hand, to replace each arrival with the nearest destination, to keep you in what may still be called flesh. Cliffs, ropes, pills, wings. It's not like you specified any real alternatives. I don't blame you. Future floods the manifold. Singular is the present. I too grip the damp earth at the edge of the pond as the crayfish eats its child in front of the children. The cold draft slits through my stomach when how? The chaplain asks only, how is your pain? Can you drink the root beer with this straw? As the oak leaf assigns a pattern to the cement, you gave me this task. I want to give it back. Read one poem from the second strange section. The tower on the hilltop. Who lived here before? How different their need to keep watch over the hilltop when there were rows of olive trees to gesture with the high winds. The tower on the hilltop. Who lived here before when there were blood-bright poppies to quiver in the gracious soil. The tower on the hilltop. Who lived here before? How different their need to keep watch over the hilltop when there were rows of gestures to branch into wind. Afterward, moving into the third section. At Steelyard Nightclub Testing Center, at the airport terminal with stacks of undone, unused carriers, valves blacken into soundless humming, soundless hummer stripping desert, the war that deleted itself before it began, soundless and humble, the deletion of the self from the message, then the message that says, this message has been deleted. Field notes. The assembly of turbines hangs off the elbow of the mountain range. Wishing, wishing, missing, missing, seething whispers to be received by the motion-stopped trees on the other side of the valley. Beyond the fault lines, fissures, summoning some shrubs, not others. Logic streaks across desert, the way blood stains flee bullet wounds. Can you scan it from above? Can you scan desert like the dark eyes, like the dark-eyed Junco did? Ask the motion-stopped trees if this is what it means to have a body. To grow into, then out of the form that says yes. The motion-stopped trees are data, database of summaries of moments when a body said no, when the body transposed, began to shout another trunk up or roar into a foreign branch, wounding roots, winding angles, shifting sightlines, so that a sun that once slid out of sky might now skid across the top of a neighboring rock formation. Okay, questions? This one is for the economists in the room. But not really. But what if they didn't like what they spent for? They'd sell it in the aftermarket. But what if a part of what they spent for broke? They'd replace it in the aftermarket. But what if they couldn't wait for the upside? They'd sell off their shares in the aftermarket. But what happened when they spent themselves? Their parts were sold in the aftermarket. But who then was left to sell the parts? Those who owned futures in the aftermarket. But who then was left to spend for the parts? Those who sold futures in the aftermarket. But how did they have bodies to sell or spend with? They replaced their parts in the aftermarket. And all of the replacements worked, and all of the systems worked. But who controlled the controllers? But what of the problem of birth? But why did they think the body was the problem? And were they right to think so? But what kept it going, if not silk and hunger? But how did it end? Field notes. And what of the sun? How it continues to sear, to throw, to shape, to shadow. And what of the sun? How it built each pixel in each eye, builds each eye and the hands that meet. And what of the sun? How it cast these hands and the seizure of sense between hands that meet to clasp a shared cache, a face without a margin. And what of the sun? When the airplane meets its shadow above sea, above white caps that curl and flip and form and fit moments before horizon movement, itself a terminal. Arrows, force, arrows, force. And what of the hands? What of the hands? What of the hands that meet to say, we are the way the church holds its music. We are the brief soak of silence when the power lines in a storm went down, the music stopped. And what of the sun, if the quiver sharp valley like a church could hold its music? Then would we still unravel the fractal wardens of will? Then would we still, then would we still, then would we still. I'll read one more poem, which I think works as a bridge to Annelyse. I think. Exit music. Then our coin machines began to translate Earth, as if all our neighbors unplugged at once. A gangrene tonality. Time-lapsed erosion or benzos blessed with a mouthpiece. The murmur chorus of theater surgeons moments before they abandon their task. Someone new thought to ask about the past. Then our coin machines began to translate Earth before Earth. Was it memory? The photovoltaic vocals seemed to suggest yes, as if magma were the same as thunder mothering fields after a drought. Ecstatic whispers, slow formed crystals, the long constitutional shout. I am telling you what I heard them say because I stopped here to listen. Get up, take your coat. This is hope, this is hope, this is hope, this is hope.
Ah, wow. I feel like I just heard God speak and now I don't want to say anything. Maybe we can just take a breath. That was so beautiful. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Kevin, for the introduction. Thank you, James and Grolier, for having us. This is so special. Wow, I was just pierced. Were you all just pierced? I really, like, my heart is beating out of my chest right now. Whew. Okay. Could we make a piece of art really fast? I built a dark room in my bathroom in Iowa City. Here's my idea. Could you maybe just cover any part? It could be your whole face or just part of your face, but like cover some part of your face with your hands, and then I'll just photograph you. And then in like a month, we'll see what it looked like. That's my idea. Okay. Thank you. That was probably beautiful. We'll find out. Oh. Okay, it's rewind. That was the last photo. That's a good sign. It's just gonna rewind now. Wow. Okay. Hi, I'm Annelyse. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm gonna read from this book called Vexations. It's a book-length poem, so I'll start at the beginning and then I might skip around a little. Okay, that'll stop eventually, hopefully. There it goes. Okay. Even the grass was coming up positive. Souls beating little match tips of blood. A reticular glitch made me saccade like crazy. Clouds like anemones, electric fortresses. A dandelion fluff might fly in your mouth as you ate a hamburger, the last hamburger. That was the year the hurricanes began. I hardly swelled, but felt her features forming. There were airs, waters, places, daughters. I pressed my eyes dry like flowers in book. A tree couldn't move without tearing its roots. There was no other world to bring a child into. Crowds coagulated to watch falling bodies. Daughter depicted them on my uterine walls. We were firm believers in teleology. At first, night crews came, like sexton beetles, men with bird masks and wheelbarrows. After a while, there were too many to clean up. Just the ginkgos, a parent might say, regarding the smell. Sometimes a crater held the imprint of a face. The dominant metaphor for the brain was the computer. Subterranean romance, romance of alterity. Who notices the horse becomes the horse, went the saying. I was terrified, of course. I had noticed the mane. I lay down in the flower bed. Fresh in the dirt, she pushed out of me. They cut her in cold water from a rubber hose. Red daughter, red birth. The timbre of an infant's cry foreshadowed its destiny. If there is no pain, you may not be injured, went the saying. Or you may have severed the nerve. It was around that time I started taking the pills. The jingle went, elsewhere, elsewhere. That was the only lyric. They made my skin glossy, like it was about to cry. The body became basically a repository of data. A craving was fungible. You could want pretty much anything. A body was fungible. You could be pretty much anyone. Moths, lots, swarmed the lighthouse lamps. Ships crashed into cliffs, one after another. Elements emerged between our legs like coiled appendages of jellyfish. It was around that time I started taking the pills. Cultivars rolled out each season like new hemlines. I carried the procedures within me, dormant, like viruses. The environment updated itself at regular intervals. Sometimes a new species of tree frog, sometimes a lethal infection. People played chess across unfathomable expanses. Studies said fetuses preferred wasps to orchids. Exquisitely dependent, a scientist might say, regarding a spider web. We lost everything, a clown might say, regarding the quake. A person might pay thousands to utter the word dapple. Thousands more to say dapple in front of another person. We crawled out of the seas and smuggled their salts inside each of our cells, each of our portable oceans. Everyone was a labor theorist. No one was a laborer. It was quaint, crass even, to disturb the air with sound waves. Creamy like a library, someone wrote, regarding madness. Creamy like certain roses, regarding a woman's cheeks. Creamy bursts, regarding flares dropped from choppers. Creamy, a prayer between two flights. Creamy, the inner surface of one thigh. We didn't know what to do with our garbage. Situations were generally regarded with suspicion. Every extinction was a planned obsolescence. Wretched, a professor might say, regarding the culture. It was forbidden to cause a situation to occur. As for commodities, half the toothpaste was poison, man-made lakes in their too accurate colors. A bark beetle inscribed an elm illegibly. Opaque bodies transparentized where they touched. Soft pop of grubs disclosing their imperiled parts. A tender-tongued admirer is spied an especially attractive shrub with which to munch away the afternoon. Sometimes we felt sick from eating too much food. Imagining the future was one wholesome hobby. If you couldn't imagine, you could just go by rote. It was impossible to tell the difference. A person's eyes didn't really unfocus when they had a picture in their mind, not like in the novels. Besides, we were not communicating so much as auditioning sentences for each other. With devout fervor, we humiliated one another. A person might pay thousands to be made chaste again. Celebrate, a counselor might say, regarding productivity. People lay in alcoves with their faces to the concrete in the overgrown parking lot of a reputation laundering firm. The jingle went, elsewhere, elsewhere. I sang it in my sleep. In front of the police chief's house, a live oak cracked the sidewalk like creme brulee. Beneath the paving stones, there was not a beach. There were only life-sustaining elements. We would move through life quickly and never get hurt, like a hand brushed through a lit wick, unburnt. I went to a bright mall with a fire in its center. The ceiling was made of thick glass, magnifying glass, concentrating sunlight into the center of the fire. Over the PA, someone announced a sale on underwear. Photons were bouncing off my face, lost forever. Precarity made me swoon, perfectly breathtaking. Over the PA, someone recited a list of integers, the meaning of which was not intelligible to me. 25, 84, 41, 81. I fell absolutely in love with the voice, my elsewhere. I felt sure that if the numbers concluded, I would die. The mall twinkled with a promising aura of possibility. The voice stopped and I did not die, ergo I was not in love. We purchased equipment for sleeping safely outdoors. We stored this equipment carefully until it was garbage. Newscasters invented new verbs to accommodate the news. Over the PA, someone announced that the mall was closing. People came up to me and said, "Did you hear?" People came up to me and said, "What mall?" Sitting in silence aroused the neighbors. Minute exchanges of power were a universal currency. An incarcerated man asked for a photograph of the sun. I found the eggs and set a trap in the pantry. We were cloven. We equipped ourselves with debt. We wrote contracts with the rivers and signed them. The word impending no longer prefaced collapse. The earth smelled like shit from runoff and rainlessness. Like my predecessors, I suffered from a crisis of attention. Speculate meant to imagine, but also to gamble. We were hopeless with risk, helpless, wrapped. I put the oval on the back of my tongue. One day, daughter sliced her palm open on the gate in the backyard where the possum wouldn't stop hissing. We hit it with a hockey stick, but it wouldn't budge. Its tail was thick and pale, like the forearm of a man we punish by putting him in a cell where he can't empathize with anyone. We hit him with a hockey stick, but he won't budge. I jiggled the faucet and outsputtered the muck. The cut was wide but not deep, praise be. A toy train passed behind a toy mountain and disappeared. Have you ever watched a child develop solitude Doubt comes over her like a sleeper wave on a gorgeous day. The blood was common poppy red, the grass chroma key green. Sometimes daughter tried to write with my hand. A subdivided insect ate one bite of each available plant, with its diffuse body, spreading like an oil spill over the roses, a seed dispersed by exploding. And the mountains rose, purpled to the hilt. All of a sudden is how fish occupied the land. People rode gondolas to nice-looking viewpoints. People learned how to make concrete and then forgot. People saw ambulance lights through someone else's front door's stained glass paneling. People sat in the backs of taxis and professed intentions. In a fake Russian schoolhouse, an intern sprinkled fake dust onto the fake wooden school desk. On the assembly line, I assembled a single petiole. Plastids eroded my prints until I couldn't scan in. They severed me to propagate below the aerial root. A frond flattered with a fingertip unfurled. A cassette tape dissolved like a body in acid. We regretted our failure to explore the oceans. People built robots to clean the dust off solar panels. A mirrored array bounced sunbeams to a collection tower. Birds flew through the light and were cooked in midair. People built robots to pick up the bird corpses. The desert blew into the forest and civilized the trees. Over the PA, someone said, "A diamond is forever." As for the wristband, just as for the corn, it was cheaper to throw it away than to sell it. It was cheaper to buy a new watch than to fix it. Just as for the cancer, it was cheaper to throw you away than to treat it. When the robots broke, we piled them with old car parts behind chain link fences. We didn't know what to do with our garbage. In a pocket of ordinary time, I met a horse. He was two big, warm lips under my lips. He looked at me, the way people looked at each other in alleyways before the situation, trying to decide if they ought to be nervous. When I held bobby pins in my mouth, braiding daughter's hair, and she cried when the fox said, "Please, tame me." And she cried when the boy said, "I want to, very much, but..." Driving in grids made me think in grids. I sent little pictures of hearts from the waiting room. We played piano for the dog and laughed when he sang. Children learned the word and then the word or. Children lied when asked where they'd been. A child was both more and less of a person than an adult. I read her the book about the little rabbit who tells his mother he is running away. "If you become a little boy and run into a house," said the mother bunny, I said. "I will become your mother and catch you in my arms and hug you," I said. I read her the book about the little rabbit who says goodnight to every object in the room. People turn blue in jacuzzis full of ice cubes. People posing for portraits play-acted tolerance. They killed the grasshopper and she screamed. Daughter reclined on a chaise longue with a lute rendered in perspective and lifted her elbows to expose her abilities. Over the PA, someone breathed quickly in and out. Chartreuse and red made a person feel dread. Whiskey and wine made a person divine. Water and bread made a person feel fed. Apple and pear made a person beware. A satellite was visible in the middle of the day. Epiphany approached, then skittered away. A new hospital was the same place, in a different location. The walls of a room reported its inhabitants. Soft and hard surfaces vibrated sympathetically. Boredom sensitized us to overheard speech. Daughter's body was less and less contiguous. We wrapped her in dressings when she dressed. The dog barked at the moon, but it wouldn't come down. Mama, said daughter, what street did the horses live on? I don't know, tell me, I said. Main Street, said daughter. And why did the horses move? I don't know, tell me, I said. They didn't like their neighborhood, said daughter. A sentence, like a massacre, had to be answered. Birds in clear-cut woods mimicked heavy machinery. People were tossing buckets of white paint onto the street to reflect the sunlight. People were planting panic grass in the medians between the hulking tractors. People recorded a womb from the inside and played it back. They snapped on the bracelet and put her in solitary. Elsewhere, elsewhere, I swayed where I stood, sessile as a weed. She lay back on the gurney. Shadows clung to her chest and dripped from her cheekbones like a special effect. I peeled the rinds of my cuticles back and kept going. She coughed into a tissue. Black gunk shone there like tar. Daughter was waxy, like a memory of someone you haven't seen in a really, really long time. The screen had 12 faces on it, in varying degrees of agony. 12 faces to communicate the entire range of human feeling. She tapped one in the middle, trying to be brave. I tried not to think about the 13th face. Thank you so much. Thanks again to Zoe. Thank you to all of you. Both Zoe and I have books available for sale, and we'll be happy to talk to you and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you all for joining us this evening. Let's give the poets another round of applause. And thank you all for joining us again. We have some books for sale over here. The poets will be signing books. If everyone could please put your chairs up against one of these 3 walls here, I'd be very grateful. Thank you so much.
Make cassette tapes in Iowa.